Hey everyone, my name is Rich, and this is Rich Talks Records, episode number 31. And today we are going to be, we are finally beginning the saga. We are going to be talking about the first album by Public Image Ltd. First issue, it's also, I believe, known as being a self-titled album, but here it is, released in 1978. This early period of Public Image Ltd, I have been doing winter albums, and that's one of the other reasons I wanted to do this video now, because the early version of Public Image Ltd, these early years, they are the ultimate winter band for me, and I'll probably get into that more specifically here and there, but they are emblematic of winter for me. So we had really bad ice storm, followed by a pretty decently bad snowstorm, and then the rest of this week is going to be like topping out at like, you know, between 1 and like 8 degrees. So this is prime Public Image Ltd time for a listening time for me. So yeah, one other thing, the channel just had its 1-year anniversary, I found out. So, my original idea, I somehow thought I had started the channel in March of last year, but I no, it was January. Who knew? And, my whole thing was, my first video was a Lou Reed video. I was going to do another Lou Reed video. I thought, that'll be, every year I'll do another Lou Reed video, right? And, but I've been wanting to get around to Bill. I've been talking about it, and I just thought, damn it, I don't want to go off and do a Lou Reed video or videos, and put Public Image Ltd off yet again. And I mentioned it in the last Public Image Limited video that I made, and that is the website. It hasn't been updated since 2016, but the website fodderstomp.com. I will be linking extensively to that site below. And by the way, the links for this video are going to be nuts. So I'm going to be going all in. So if you're a fan of Public Image Ltd, if you wanted to know more, learn more, it's going down. So check the section, check the description section. And so yeah, Fodder Stomp did an absolutely incredible, did incredible work contextualizing Public Image Ltd and just really painting the picture. So they one of the prime sections of the website was a year-by-year chronology, and I feel like that's kind of the best way to tell the tale. So, you know, this video truly could not have been made without the incredible work of Fodder Stomp. So all credit to them. You know, if I was making money off of this, or if I had a Patreon or something like that, I would cut them in. I'd figure out a way to cut them in, because like it's kind of at that level, right? So yeah, that kind of, I feel like that sort of needs to be stated from the jump off. So I talked a little bit about my history with Public Image Ltd in the last Pill video I did. There's not that much to say other than, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because this video is going to be long, but I had mentioned in the last one how I had gotten second edition, and then I had sort of purely by dumb luck bought the bulk of the back catalog in one day, right? And all my Pill records are right about here. This one was very early on. I got second edition. So I started with Greatest Hits So Far, but then I got second edition. I think I got this next. And I just happened to see. So, for those of you who don't know, this album did not get an official American release until 2013. Apparently, most Americans don't know that this album even existed. That seems impossible to me, especially with the advent of the internet. But it just is baffling to me. This is at the same record store that I've talked about in other videos where I got all my John Lennon bootlegs. Pure dumb luck. Just happened to be there. Couldn't believe it. You can see here's where I scratched off the price tag. Didn't do a very good job. Public Image Ltd., the nebulous strains of Public Image Ltd. Begin where the Sex Pistols end, right? So, the ill-fated American tour, which broke the band up and just utterly splintered them, on that tour, Lydon, I don't know if he had written the lyrics to the song Public Image already. My understanding was that he wrote the lyrics to Public Image and Religion on that tour. That was my understanding. I could be wrong about that, but my understanding is that he wrote both of those while on that ill-fated trek across America. Lydon and Vicious traveled by bus. Cook, McLaren, and Jones traveled by plane. Lydon actually wanted to see America and actually liked seeing America. John grew up watching John Wayne movies and loved some of the same things that I love about America: the big, endless, flat expanses of land. He also loved going through different parts of the South. So the trip through the South, that the Sex Pistols, in case you don't know, it was Malcolm McLaren's idea to have them avoid playing New York and major cities and playing in the North. And this is one of the few times that McLaren and Lydon actually saw eye to eye. Lydon very much saw it as that they were going to play to real America, and that would have been fish in a barrel. It would have been too easy to just go to New York and Chicago and LA and wow them and go back to Britain, right? So that this was a way to actually playing to people. And if you look at the venues that they're booked in, these are relatively tiny little like cowboy bars. So McLaren, as he tends to do, paints it in sort of grandiose terms that they were going to be lost in the Badlands across America. So Lydon wanted to really immerse himself in that, and him and Sid spent most of their per diems, as is my understanding, going to record stores and just buying up records. As Lydon notes in No Irish, No Blacks, No Dogs, all they had in England were little corner record shops, and you had to send away for most things. And so he loved these big, gigantic record stores that he could go in. And a funny story, when they finally got to San Francisco, they went into a sort of gay bondage leather gear shop, and there was lubrication designed for and Sid squeezed some out onto his hand and started spiking up his hair with it, and John famously said, "Great, Sid, now you can stick your head up someone's ass," which is one of my favorite one-liners of all time. But the band, the one big venue they played, the one sort of proper rock venue they played, the one that was the most filmed and the most recorded, was when they played Winterland in '78. That was on January the 14th of 1978. For reference, 2 weeks after that show is when John Lydon would have turned 22. So think about that. So he was a 21-year-old. Sid would have been 20 at that point. Sid was a few months away from his 21st birthday. So I think that's always kind of the thing to remember with these guys. These were extremely young men. It's 21 years old. Again, what were you doing at 21? I was working. I was a page in a library, right? On January the 17th, the Sex Pistols broke up. John Lydon went to New York. There are photos of him hanging out with Joan Jett. He is still wearing the tartan that he had made for the U.S. tour. Didn't have a ton of clothes, didn't have a ton of money, didn't have a way of staying apparently in San Francisco longer. He often talked about how Malcolm McLaren, McLaren was absconding with the money anyway, but Lydon talked about the fact that he would often have to take, after a show, he would have to take the tube back with fans. So, to where he was staying. So, again, when people paint this as, they were these cynical, piss-taking, people lining their pockets. No, they weren't. I mean, this really was from the fucking ground up. And again, look at footage of the shows. Look at the Pistols when they actually played in England. Look at when they went up to Sweden. Look at those shows. This is not Led Zeppelin at Earl's Court. You know what I mean? Or pick any other, or whoever playing Madison Square Garden, 5 nights at Madison Square Garden. This is not, or the Rolling Stones, even better. The Rolling Stones at Earl Court when Mick Jagger had the trapeze and shit. This is not that. Or David Bowie on a cherry picker, So I think that people really lose the frame of reference, and as history goes along, the recontextualizing just gets messier and messier. So anyway, a few days after the show is when, excuse me, Lydon breaks it to the press that he is out of the band. So Nevermind the Bollocks had come out on Virgin, Richard Branson's startup record label, and Lydon goes to Jamaica for 3 weeks. There is some really fascinating footage out there on YouTube, it's very fragmentary, but the idea was that Branson wanted to start a subsidiary reggae label and called Frontline, and Lydon was down there to sign artists to Frontline. Lydon, unlike the Clash, who ran into all sorts of problems when they went to Jamaica, which resulted in their song Safe European Home, Lydon was very much accepted and embraced by the Rasta Brethren. And part of that, what Lydon sort of puts that down to, is where he came from in the Council Flats. That there was a heavy Jamaican immigrant population, and that was always kind of part of his background. That was always part of his deal. From the time he was a teenager, he was when the Lydon family would have a knees up, John was the DJ, and one of his favorite things to play was reggae records. So he was deeply, deeply immersed in that. He was very good friends with Don Letts, the punk reggae connection, and the thing that what Bob Marley wound up writing Punky Reggae Party about, all of that stuff. A lot of that is forged by Lydon and Letts. So I think it's always kind of interesting to note that. While in Jamaica, Branson apparently flew Devo down to Jamaica and tried to talk them into having John be the lead singer for Devo. John was a fan of Devo. Devo apparently did not take the idea seriously, were not particularly interested. Devo were Devo. I mean, the idea of grafting on this guy from England on top of this very specific Akron, Ohio, Midwest sensibility. And those guys were much older than John. Like, it's a terrible idea. And I love Devo. I've already mentioned them before. Like, they're one of my favorite groups. Obviously, I love John, but that would not have ever mixed. Many years later, John and Devo played a festival together, just a few years ago, and there's a lot of charming photos of them sort of hanging out and reminiscing. But yeah, so I don't think that was ever a good idea. Lydon apparently never actually crossed paths with Devo in '78. So from there, the other big scandal is that McLaren sent a Sex Pistols roadie down to Jamaica to try to surreptitiously film John. So it's blamed on McLaren. I mean, Julian Temple, who wound up working with Lydon and doing in the 2000s the remarkably brilliant Filth and the Fury documentary, one of the greatest documentaries ever about a band. I mean, it is a masterpiece. I think that was kind of done as an atonement for making the Great Rock and Roll Swindle. But so I don't know if it was Julian Temple. Julian Temple has kind of alluded to the fact that it was his idea to send somebody down there, but the other people blame McLaren for it. So who knows kind of what the reality of that is. But McLaren, this roadie shows up and is hiding behind trees, trying to film John with I guess a fucking Super 8 or something, so that they can cut in footage of him into the strange debacle that is the Great Rock and Roll Swindle. Someday I will do a post. I will do a proper Sex Pistols video, but I will do a post-breakup gray area Sex Pistols video, and get into some of the weird ins and outs of all that stuff and the utter baffling strangeness that is the Great Rock and Roll Swindle film and album. But definitely not doing that today. Apparently, some of the Rasta Brethren, from what I have read, were responsible for getting the Sex Pistols roadie back, unwelcoming him from Jamaica. We'll put it that way. So I've heard stories about that, and that at least in this initial period, some of the Rasta Brethren kind of acted as sort of bodyguards for Lydon. Again, he was very embraced, like Lee Scratch Perry, like all those guys loved that he was down in Jamaica and were very excited to Big Youth, like all those, like they were all very, very excited to be around him. They loved God Save the Queen. They were with it. So it was very much a meeting of the minds, right? So anyway, in February, Lydon is back in London, and these are the beginnings of the famous, what's known as the Sex Pistols court case. Lydon sued McLaren. Initially, Jones and Cook sided with McLaren because that's what they had always done. Lydon, to his credit, was actually fighting for them. The idea was to split everything 4 ways, including Vicious, /5 ways, Glenn Matlock for his period, his publishing, his cut of the publishing. So, yeah. The other thing that Lydon does is, during this period, is he takes his mother on a trip to California. His mother is terminally ill at this point. John and his mom are ridiculously close. So that also happens. So while all of this is playing out, his mom is very, very ill with cancer. So that's a kind of the Sex Pistols lawsuit is like an undercurrent of all of this. the shenanigans of the makings of the Great Rock and Roll Swindle are an undercurrent of all of this. What Sid is getting up to is an undercurrent of all of this. And the fact that John's mother is dying is an undercurrent of all of this. So there's a lot happening all at the same time. What Lydon does, though, is the money that he was able to get, is he buys a house in Gunter Grove with his share of Sex Pistols money. And that is kind of probably one of the smartest moves that he could have made. And one of the things that's interesting in all of this is the parallels between NWA and the Sex Pistols. And someday I will elucidate more on this. But John Lydon is truly the Ice Cube or Ice Cube was the John Lydon of NWA. And what's interesting is the person who was the most potent artistic force, gave the dimension of believability and reality, was also the person who dealt with the group the most realistically, and both in groups that were prone to fanciful self-mythologizing and telling outrageous tall tales and being outrageous for the sake of provocation, that they were the linchpin of reality, but they were also the linchpin of reality in their lives and dealt with their own lives the most realistically. I've always found the similarities really fascinating. The other thing that's fascinating, and someday I will elucidate more on, is it's interesting how the post Ice Cube NWA is very similar to post Rotten Pistols. They both kind of don't, they're a little directionless, we'll put it that way. And someday and yet there are things that are fascinating and great, but they lose a lot of their potency. By spring of 1978, Lydon has the house at Gunter Grove. Him and Nora are living there, and Lydon starts inviting people around to jam and to just try making music. And Lydon is trying to work out what he wants to do, right? So it's at this point I might as well, one of the early people involved is a guy by the name of John Wardle. So I will now briefly touch upon the phenomenon of the Johns. So, as Lydon talked about in the Filth and the Fury documentary, I think it was Steve Jones, could not believe when Lydon came into the Sex Pistols, could not believe that there was this thing known as the Johns. He thought it was a put-on. He thought it was or maybe a performance art gang, or that they truly were these dangerous, weird, avant-garde thugs. Thought it was like a Clockwork Orange gang. So the phenomenon of the Johns is you have John Lydon, you have John Gray, you have John Rambo Stevens, you have John Beverly, also known as Sid Vicious, and you have John Wardle, who becomes, so one of the Johns, John Beverly, became Sid Vicious and joins the Pistols. Well, one of the first people to come round and be involved with the musicians at Gunter Grove was John Wardle, who gets renamed Jaw Wobble. Now, Jaw Wobble had, so I think Jaw Wobble was 18 at this point, and had started playing the bass and really wanted to be a bass player, but was still more or less a novice. On April 16th, Lydon appears on the London Weekend Show and is interviewed by Janet Street Porter. That interview will be linked below. It is a fascinating interview. John is interviewed whilst walking down the street. Again, similar to the post-NWA Ice Cube interviews. where Cube was constantly in South Central. Fascinating interview, but again, that's all very nebulous. Apparently, a person watching that night, and we might as well get to this, was Keith Levine. So we have Jaw Wobble. So we have John Lydon, we have Jaw Wobble, and now we will get into Keith Levine. So here we go. In 2014, Keith Levine started, I think it was a GoFundMe, to complete the Commercial Zone 2014 project, or CZ 2014. I was one of the backers of that, and with this, as part of that, I got this homemade book. I was a teenage guitarist for The Clash. As you can see, this is just bound together by these little strings, and the pages of the book, I'm not going to undo it, but the pages of the book are, because I added this little clip to just keep things together, because otherwise loose, the pages just would fall out vertically, right, as they are now. But on the back here, J. Keith Levine, and fuck this, I don't know if you can see this, hopefully you can, fuck this, I hate school, and drew a little guitar. So this is like one of the, I don't know, it's pretty cool that I got this. I've tried to keep it in its original condition. This is, except for the clip, this is just cardboard, and it's hard to be let's see, it's already coming off. I don't know if you can see that. This was written in crayon, and it smudges like hell. So you can see the very few times I have handled this, it smudges terribly. But in that book, Keith talks about his early years. It's pretty short. I forget how. It's like maybe 35 pages. It's not that long. But it appears to have like been typed on like an old school computer. It's like the Curry or New font from like that old IBMs would have. So Keith Levine, one of my favorite musicians in the world, one of my favorite guitar players, somebody who is right up there with anybody as far as I'm concerned. Keith Levine, there is a little confusion around just how much he was classically trained. Early bios of Pill and stuff, I guess, said that he was, but in later years he claimed that he wasn't. He claimed that he was self-taught. An interesting contrast to the oft-told and true lore that Steve Jones stole the gear from the Ziggy Stardust motion picture, the D.A. Pennebaker film, that after the sound check for that, Steve Jones snuck in and stole gear from the Spiders from Mars. There is a really funny clip. Someday when I will do Sex Pistols videos, I'll put that in. But I'll link that. But there is a funny thing on Steve Jones's radio show where he returns or gives the cash equivalent to, is it Woody Woodmansey, or I forget who it is. I haven't seen it in many years. But he's like, I'm sorry for stealing from you guys. So in an interesting contrast to that, of Steve Jones literally stealing gear from David Bowie, Keith Levine also hung around a big early 70s rock phenomenon, and also got a crack at the gear, except it was Keith Levine's then favorite band, Yes. And he was basically, I think Steve, from what I understand, his favorite guitarist was Steve Howe, and that he, to some degree, was mentored by Steve Howe, but he would get to tune the drums, and he was always trying to get at Rick Wakeman's banks of synthesizers, and eventually I think that he became a roadie. They saw his enthusiasm. They saw that he was a nascent great player. He would have been 16 at the time, and and I guess eventually his roadieing days were cut short because he just wanted to use their equipment and play, and he wasn't doing like the proper roadie things of actually making sure the stuff was set up to their specifications. So I think that's a fascinating sort of tidbit. But Keith was then, as the London SS morphed into the Clash, Keith was a founding member of the Clash, along with Mick Jones. Somewhere in there, Keith also was big in the formations of the Flowers of Romance, which had Sid. So this is where I will now just mention this. Keith always said that Sid was a much better musician than people gave him credit for. That he claims that he taught Sid to play bass, and that Sid could in fact play, but he tutored Sid. But Susie Sue was also in that band, and a lot of other people were in and out of the Flowers of Romance. But he was a part of that. But also he mentored the Slits, and kind of gave them music lessons, basically, because the Slits were really, really raw when they first started. I mean, the early footage of the Slits is, this is a C, there's the thing in their practice room of, this is a C chord, this is a G chord, this is a D chord, now go start a band, right? So Keith sort of mentored them along, but the Clash, it was his idea to bring in Joe Strummer, and then somewhere in there is when they got, I don't remember when Terry Chimes came in, but somewhere in there after they got Joe is when they got Paul Simonon. I think that's how it went. So they were a 3-guitar, 5-person lineup. I don't think there are any recordings with Keith in the band. There is, however, a really good sounding show of the screen on the green, that I'll also link to, and you can hear Keith. Now, his idea with the Clash, partially to differentiate them from the Pistols, was that his idea was that he wanted the Clash to be the fastest band to ever exist. That was his concept, right? And it's interesting to hear the versions of those songs. There's 5 or 6 songs that just never made it to the first album on that set. But it's interesting that because they're kind of closer to the 101ers, or almost they're like a kind of a more rocked up version of Mott the Hoople, or in a lot of ways. They're not. I don't know that I would necessarily say that they were punky. They still sound in a strange way sort of pre-punk, in the same way that like the New York Dolls sound pre-punk, So that being said, Keith's angular guitar interjections are there from the beginning. Now, Keith claimed that he got screwed over in the publishing. I believe the only song on the debut album that he's given writing credit for is "What's My Name." I think that's the case, and but he claims that he had written or co-written more songs, but that's the only one that he got official writing credit on. I don't know what the ins and outs of all that are, and I'm not a Clash historian, so I really don't know. But Keith didn't like the direction they were going in. I don't think that he liked when the lyrics became hyper political. And I think the Clash were just too formalist for him. And again, the idea of that they were going to be the fastest band, that kind of never really materialized. So Keith, now, Clash lore has it that Keith was kicked out for being a heroin addict. Keith claims that he quit who knows what the reality of all of this is? Who knows? At some point when Keith Levene was in the Clash opened up for the Sex Pistols. It was at the Black Swan in Sheffield in '76. And John and Keith sort of started talking during one of the band's sound checks. They both felt like they were the kind of the outcasts within their own bands, and they apparently joked that when both of their respective bands ended, that they should start a band. So anyway, so Keith is watching this interview, apparently calls up and is like, I want to be the guitar player in the band. So that is where Keith Levene enters the picture. So interestingly, Keith brought along a friend of his named Mickey Toldy, who and the idea was originally that Pill was going to be a 5-person lineup and was going to have 2 guitars. But after rehearsing for a few weeks, I guess they decided that Keith was more than enough as a guitar player, and Mickey Toldy went the way of the Edsel. Somewhere in there is when we start getting into the phenomenon of some of the non-musical members of Public Image Ltd. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but one of the early people was the photographer Dennis Morris, who also wound up joining the band, the Basement 5. Dennis Morris, of course, did the artwork for the band. We are just flying through this year. The band placed an advertisement for a drummer, and they get a Canadian by the name of Jim Walker. Jim Walker had been in a Canadian punk band called the Furies, but he had apparently been in London for a few months and was checking the music papers to see. He wanted to figure out after the Pistols broke up. He wanted to figure out how he could be the drummer for whatever Johnny Rotten was going to do next. So he was kind of tracking Lydon and trying to figure out a way in. So he showed up, and that was it. He apparently aced the audition, and so that was it. We now had all 4 members of the band late spring of 1978. The early songs were the title track and then Sod in Heaven, which was the original title of Religion. But then also, interestingly, they were doing the Sex Pistols song Belson Was a Gas, and I will talk about that later on. But also, interestingly, they were doing a cover of My Generation. So those were the first 4 songs that they were working, their early repertoire. The joke name that they were operating under was the carnivorous buttock flies. So in July, the formation of Public Image Ltd. Took another major step, and that is the band registered as a limited company called Tinkiskis. So the very weird idea and highly sort of what the hell aspect of the band, and the terminology starts to become very convoluted for the next couple of years around this, starts here. That they were a corporation, not a band. And in 2003, this is a quote from Keith Levene. Yes, we set it up as a company. We bought a company off the shelf called Tinkiskis because you do that. You buy companies off the shelf, and Public Image Ltd. Was a limited company. Interesting. A week later, in mid-July, the band starts recording their debut single. It was recorded at Advision Studios, and with John Leckie, who had already who had worked with Magazine. So and then it was mixed at Wessex Studios, and they worked with the engineer Bill Price. Now, Bill Price, of course, famous from having been the engineer on Nevermind the Bollocks. 2 weeks after recording the single is when it is announced that the band will be called Public Image. The the limited part comes some point soon after that. But this is where we start to get into the mythology of the band, or the concept of the band, or the whatever. I mean, I think they actually did try to take steps to make this reality, but I think there was kind of like a performance art aspect to it, though they themselves would, John Lydon would probably recoil at the idea of calling it that. But the name Public Image came from a 1968 novel by Muriel Spark. But this is where it starts getting into that they were going to be entirely self-managed. They were going to do that everything was going to be in-house. That they were managing themselves. They were doing all of their own artwork. They were producing all of their own records. All of that. That the idea was that all of it was going to be contained in-house. And it was at this point, it was somewhere around here that Virgin basically announced that. Not announced, but it was worked out that Virgin / Warner Brothers was going to do the lateral move of John Lydon was going to be moved out of the Sex Pistols and re-upped as a signed artist under the idea of Public Image Ltd. And so I guess it was an 8-album contract. Also around this time, Lydon was up for the role of Jimmy in Quadrophenia, but that just was never really going to work. The other thing that was never really going to work is also somewhere in here. Peter Grant made overtures to manage. I guess he ran into Lydon and Jim Walker in a pub and expressed very serious interest in trying to take over their affairs and manage them. And Lydon, for better or for worse, said no, that they wanted to be absolutely self-contained. So this idea, and that's where it's not performance art, because he literally fucking turned down Peter Grant. So you think Peter Grant could have made things happen? Oh yeah. You think Peter Grant could have worked out the packaging for their albums and like some of the outrageous ideas? Like, you think he could have figured that out? I mean, that was what he did with Led Zeppelin. So I mean, they were very serious about that and not making careerist moves. Somewhere also in here, this might have been later in '79. I don't remember, but also somewhere in here is when Branson and or Warner Brothers tried to present Lydon with tapes. I think some of them might have been. I don't know. This part I don't remember. It's been years since I've read this, but of trying to like hook him up with backing bands, and I don't remember if one of them did have stuff from Steve and Paul. I think that might have actually been many years later. But the idea of trying to get him to make a punk band, quote unquote, with basically with studio guys, and that they were going to make like real records now. He was going to get a real band behind him, because they did not want Public Image Ltd. I mean, the idea that Jaw Wobble could like literally barely play the bass, and had only been playing for like a few months, that was just beyond comprehension to them. So at one point, Lydon was invited out onto like Richard Branson's yacht and was presented like, here's what could be the backing tracks for your punk rock comeback. And so I mean that's what Lydon was dealing with. That and it's interesting because he was basically criticized for not making careerist moves, for that this was all incredibly silly, that he wouldn't just hook up with like a proper backing band, you know? So I think that that's like one of the most important things to bear in mind. But speaking of sort of non-careerist moves, right? But speaking of non-careerist moves, right? First of all, the reason why the band didn't complete the album at Advision is because one of the second engineers, Jaw Wobble, felt was being very disrespectful to him, and Wobble beat him up. So they were banned from the studio, and that was where they lost Bill Price, and they didn't work anymore with John Leckie. So that was one of the first signs of, wow, these guys are like uncontrollable, and this is a chaotic group of people. But even kind of more chaotic was in August. They were supposed to make their television debut on a show called Revolver, filmed in Birmingham, and Keith Levine took a train to Birmingham and showed up all alone. Why? Because the rest of Pill had fucked off and decided to go sunbathing and drinking and having a good time. And so Keith Levine is just alone in in this television studio. I feel like those two things are the first two strong indications that, like, no, these are not sort of careerist people who are going to do what anybody wants them to do, right? So this is probably a good place to talk about the phenomenon of, especially with the idea of Pill, is it's a corporation, it's not a band. This is probably a good place as any to talk about the non-musical members of Public Image Limited. Some of these people weren't technically members of the corporation band. I'm just going to say band, okay? Some of these people were just kind of affiliated and in the mix, and some of these people actually were like full members of Public Image Limited. It's just that they didn't play. It's just that they didn't play music. So the first would be Dennis Morris. Dennis Morris obviously did the artwork and took the promotional photos of them. He, I guess, designed the early. Not just the photo shoots, but the actual design, graphic design of the Pill, the early Pill advertisements. So I will, maybe right now as I'm talking, I will have those pop up on the screen. So those are wonderful and hilarious, and super memorable. Apparently, and this is much debated, kind of in the same way with Jamie Reed with the Sex Pistols, it's a little, even to this day, it's a little unclear how much of the design of Nevermind the Bollocks was Lydon's idea versus Jamie Reed's. There still apparently is some discussion around that. John claimed that the Public Image Limited logo, which is seen here, right? That the Pill logo was his idea, but Dennis Morris appears to have actually created it or drawn it, and the idea that it would look like a pill, like an aspirin. So again, how much of that was Lydon's? How much of that was Dennis Morris? We don't really know. As I pointed out in my Marianne Faithfull Broken English video, her cover for Broken English bears some relation to this. But then also the back cover of Iggy's New Values is not dissimilar. So Iggy was clearly paying attention, and on some level Mick Jagger was paying attention, because I feel like some of the later 70s, early 80s, some of the shots of Mick and kind of the Tattoo You era is similar as well. So that is Dennis Morris. Then we have Mark Gray, who was never again, I don't think he was officially a member, but he had worked with Vivienne Westwood, and when John Lydon left the Sex Pistols, he went with John, and so he did a lot of their early clothes. So the early photo shoots of Pill, those like hand painted shirts, and maybe I'll throw a couple of those up as well. Those are all his work. One of the things is with Lydon that in the Sex Pistols, they would use a lot of their own terminology in their iconography. Pill didn't really have that many songs yet, so in one of the photos you'll see like Sod in Heaven is painted like sort of around the rib cage of Lydon. I think that's because that was one of the only songs they had completed at that point. One of the people who absolutely was a member was Dave Crow. Dave Crow was the quote-unquote company secretary. I am quoting Keith Levine. We made him a secretary, and he ended up keeping accounts and receipts together, and so on. And then finally, we have Jeanette Lee. Jeanette Lee was around from 78 to 82. Jeanette Lee's role increases over time. I think at this point, her function was a little nebulous. She, I think, was just kind of doing admin work along with Dave Crow early on. As things progress, she becomes their videographer and in-house filmmaker. And we'll get more into that later. A lot of missed opportunities, I think, in that case, and a lot of stuff that has still never really been released. Predating the release of the Public Image Ltd. Album. And does it predate the single? I think it does. Yeah, it predates it by 1 week. So technically, Pill as a corporation, the idea was that it would be, there would be, that would be the umbrella, and there would be all these things underneath the umbrella. So technically, the first Public Image Ltd. Related release is not Public Image Ltd., but a Jaw Wobble solo single, which I don't have a copy of, and I don't know that I would ever... I mean, if I found a copy for $5, sure, but that's probably, like, literally never going to happen. But it is a single called Dreadlock Don't Deal in Wedlock, and it is apparently Jaw Wobble toasting over some already pre-existing reggae backing tracks, like, I guess, reggae records that had already been put out. I am not exactly, like, Joe Reggae, so I don't know the history, and I'm not really going to go and look it up. I'll just be honest with you. I have listened to it a couple times over the years. The cover art is, maybe I'll throw that up. The cover art is really something, and yeah, it's just like a phony baloney Jamaican patois over dub reggae tracks. I truly have nothing else to say about it. It's a new day, people. Yesterday's Rich did a good job, but decided that talking about the actual album would probably be a task better done to the new and improved today's Rich. So here we go. 2 weeks or a week after Jaw Wobble's debut single was the release of the Public Image single, which I don't have a copy of. The sleeve, which maybe I'll throw pictures up again, designed by Dennis Morris, really beautiful artwork, done up like a tabloid, really, really cool. The cowboy song, the B-side is the cowboy song, and it was a B-side exclusive to the single. I would have first heard it on... my rebought plastic box, I think, is still in my car. So here is again, now for the second time, my mangled OG copy of the original version of Plastic Box. So I would have first heard the Cowboy song on here. It is also on the Songs from the Heart box set, which is really cool. And it is also on the 2013 CD reissue as a bonus track. One thing I forgot to show, along with my copy of the I Was a Teenage Guitarist for the Clash, came this original Object d'Art by Keith Levine. Pretty cool. I don't know if you can see all that. And the back, 2051 is coming. 2014. And then Keith's signature. Really, really, really cool. Glad that I have this. So, you know. So it's a cool thing to have, especially since, you know, now that Keith is gone. So yeah. And I should mention, you know, Keith, was it about a year ago that Keith passed away? But also recently one of the John Rambo Stevens also passed away. John Lydon's been having a very difficult year. Last year, I guess, would have been the beginning of a very difficult period of time. John's wife, Nora, passed away, and now Rambo has passed away. So yeah, it's not a great time for John. So hopefully he's doing okay. You know, if you ever happen to see this, John, I doubt it, but if you ever happen to, you know, we us out there in the world care about you. And so, yeah. So, for whatever that is worth. I can't really imagine it as a Sex Pistols song. It would have been fascinating to see what they would have done with it. But, you know, could Paul Cook have come up with an amazing, cool drum part? Of course. Would Jones have done something cool on guitar, come up with one of his great riffs? Yeah, probably. But let's face it, Sid wasn't gonna do anything like that on the bass. And I love Steve's doubling the guitars with the bass the octave lower style, but that, you know, that was a far cry from what Public Image Ltd could do. So I think in the end it all worked out that it was the first Public Image Ltd song. So I would have to imagine you know this song. Keith Levine, where do you begin? I guess you begin with Wobble. Wobble barely was a bass player, and yet he has that sound immediately. And I've talked about this in other videos. I think one of the most important things that a musician can have, far beyond technical ability, is sonic identity. To me, that denotes a great player, a great musician. Far, far, far more than ability to play a lot of genres or, you know, do flashy things. It is ultimately all about sonic identity, I think. I think for me, with musicians, it is almost kind of like 100% about sonic identity, and with singers, it is all about believability. And if you can mix players with sonic identity and a singer with believability, you basically have perfection. That's the ultimate alchemy, I think. So Wobble's bass is all action, and it's all perfect, and it's all immediate right there from the literal opening notes. First thing you hear, he's amazing. He was I want to say he was 18 at this point. I mean, unbelievable. How many 18-year-olds can sound like that, really, you know? And just that distinctive of a sound. Now, I know that Levine had something to do with achieving Wobble's bass sound, but and you can even see in some of the soundcheck footage for the Rainbow show, Levine has the bass, and it appears to be reminding Wobble of how a part goes. I can only guess, but that sort of looks to be what the interaction is. It's just like a very brief, 10 2-second clip or something. But it appears that that's what's happening. Who knows, really? But this is all Wobble. I mean, Wobble has to. I mean, he's the man playing it, and his sonic identity is immediate and indelible, fully formed, fully realized, and perfect. How did this thing just fall out of the sky? You know, it is absolutely remarkable. And then you have Jim Walker. So there has been, and I held off on talking about this before, there has been a lot of retrospective stuff about Jim Walker, and in the Public Image is Rotten documentary, which I think is free on Tubi. I think it's well worth watching. There's sort of, in the last however many years, so for a very long time, Jim Walker was just the drummer on the first album, and was very much, I'll be honest, just very much treated as an afterthought. Like, oh, he's the idea that he's just around for a very short amount of time, he comes and goes, and then that's it. And Jim Walker, as the internet has gone along, and I think as he started speaking up for himself, but also as Wobble and Lydon talked about him, I think that Jim Walker's reputation has always, or has just risen and risen and risen over the years, and Wobble thinks that he was their best drummer. I will say this, I think that Jim Walker, like Levine, like Wobble, also has sonic identity. And you know it is him. There is he is a highly distinctive, kind of all powerful snare drummer, and keeps really, really, really fascinating time, and is very different than to me, Paul Cook. What I loved about Paul Cook was like post Ringo. Like he was like the next step of what Ringo would do, who I love. And but this, Jim Walker is, Public Image Limited at this point is more like a jazz group, and he brings that element. So where each individual component has its own thing, and you can just kind of focus in on what the hell they're doing, but then it creates this much larger whole that in fact is much greater than the sum of its parts. So and then you have Keith Levine, and there are tutorials on how to play like Keith out on YouTube, and it's interesting because people can play the parts, people can try to mimic how he got the sounds, but nobody can do what Keith did. Nobody, Keith is such a one-off, and it's interesting because there are two records that come out in 1978 that basically feature guitarists that then everybody sort of appropriated throughout the 1980s. So in heavy metal, you have Eddie Van Halen, and then in alternative world or punk or post-punk or whatever, you have Levine. And I mean, it has been oft noted that the Edge just was, I mean, to my mind, just doing like 10th rate versions of Levine, and a lot of people copped a lot of moves from him. Some of them evolved into their own musical language, their own territory, but again, nobody does what Levine does. And as much as he added cool angular elements to the Clash, this is Levine unleashed. And there was about a year in between when he left the Clash to when Pill gets going, and in that time, I mean, I think he just it just became 100-fold times greater. And so the thing that's interesting, and I've tried to think of other examples of this, for as much of a kind of a partisan John Lennon fan I am, there is a phenomenon when you listen to Paul McCartney. Funnily enough, there's a song on McCartney 2 called "One of These Days." This acoustic based song. That's the sound of the White Album. Like McCartney, that weird, darkly tinged pastoral sound that is achieved on the White Album, and that there are touches of on Rubber Soul, or even things we said today. Like, just Paul with an acoustic guitar somehow is the sound of the Beatles. He somehow, the sound of them just comes through him, if that makes any sense. And I think there are certain musicians like that in a really, really weird way, they are somehow the square root of the sound of the band. And Keith Levene is that. There are things out there of Keith on just acoustic guitar, playing for like 4 seconds, where he plays like a version of Bad Life on, I want to say it was in an interview in the 2000s maybe. That's the sound of Public Image Ltd. Just that, with like literally nothing else. He contains the sound of the band sort of within his hands. And it's interesting, like Iggy has talked about when he first met Ron Ashton, and he said that you could see that Ron Ashton was a great guitar player just by looking at his hands. He said you could see the sensitivity in his hands, and when he even the way he held the guitar, you could see that he was going to do amazing things. And so when amazing things happened, he kind of expected it to happen, right? And that's the thing with Levene. Like, when you watch him playing, you just watch his hands, the sensibility is there. There's that same, I mean, Jimi Hendrix is another one of those people. Like, the guitar is the extension of the body, but there is something about just the way that it is held, and you can see it in his hands. You know, you can see it in Chuck Berry's hands. There are certain people who have that thing. Levene has that thing. And even if he's just demonstrating something for like 2 seconds, it is complete, whole, absolute, and instantaneous. It is a big part of what I absolutely love about him. And one of the things that, one of the clips that I saw from, I guess not long before he passed away, or maybe like a year or something before, is somebody had messaged him, like, is this how you do this part of one of the songs? It's a song on the first album, I'm just totally forgetting. But Levene, interestingly enough, and kind of to this point, says, take all the effects off. Like, don't, stop mucking about with pedals and amp placements and stop that. And he says, like, just play acoustic guitar. Like, get it straight for what is coming out of your hands, and the sound and the rhythmic sense that you're getting. Make that yours, and that you are controlling that. And it really is that thing of like, then you can add electricity, then you can add a pedal. And I just think that that's so, like, to me, that makes all the sense in the world when you hear his playing, because the idea that he goes from here to here with all the other stuff then makes all the sense of the world. It's not happening effects and amplification backwards, you know? He knows exactly what he's doing and what he's going for. It is wildly, wildly apparent. And again, I mean, Hendrix, it's the same thing. When you see that acoustic set in London, Hendrix in the all-white studio just playing, like, it's the same thing. Like, Hendrix was Hendrix on that. It appears to be a very crappy nylon string guitar, I want to say. Like, Hendrix is still Hendrix. Like, he's still doing all the Hendrix stuff, because it's coming from him. It's not the wah pedals and the Marshall stacks making it happen, you know? So Levene's guitar playing is this, like, these glimmering, perfect ice flames, these I don't even know, like, these like emerald green and black and crystal blue, depending on what's happening, like fucking flames of ice that he is just able to achieve. And beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Just, it's a beautiful guitar figure. It's a beautiful, I don't even want to say it's a riff. It's just, the musicality of it is just absolutely gorgeous. And you put that on top of the incredible punch of Walker's drums and fucking wobble. Again, like I've used this term before, like making the earth turn. And then what do you have over that? My God, you have fucking John Lydon in his fucking, like, you know, peak of his powers, John Lydon. So obviously it begins with the hellos, and then it goes into, I mean, it's as good of a vocal performance as you can ever possibly get. It's absolute power, absolute conviction, and the lyrics are a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. It is his song of myself. I mean, it is a brilliant, brilliant assertion. It's an amazing declaration of independence. And you know, what's interesting is that, you know, he manages to level McLaren, he manages to level the Sex Pistols, but he also manages to level the media. He manages to level the people who physically attacked him for singing songs in public. I don't know when the actual, I don't know if, it must have had already happened by that point, where God Save the Queen had been debated on the floor of Parliament, and there was there was at least the discussion of, you know, that John and or the Pistols would be prosecuted under for treason, or under the Traitors Act, which could have been punishable by hanging. So, you know, I think sometimes people lose perspective on these things, and in the same way that I talked about, like, Lydon had to take the train home with fans. Lydon was from the projects. They generally played to very small audiences. They couldn't keep a record contract. They were banned. This is not top down. This is bottom up. It doesn't matter if Malcolm McLaren fucked around and spun tall tales and made a fake documentary. None of that matters. Like, you ultimately cannot fake the force of articulation, and you cannot fake the emotional honesty. And, you know, Lydon, I think at his best, I think for the people who can actually hear it, because there's still idiots debating about his intentions. Which I don't understand, because I feel like he's gone out of his way to make his intentions as clear as possible. And this song is one of that. You know, so it levels all of these things. It sort of combines them into one object that is then leveled. It is a phenomenal piece of writing, and it is also basically a declaration of principles, and a declaration of reality, a declaration of emotional honesty, and of philosophical honesty. And it's catchy as hell, and memorable as hell, indelible, and to use one of my terms, compulsively listenable. Amazing. Bill Price and John Leckie did a beautiful job of capturing the sparkling exuberance and crystallized perfection of what the band achieves, like they achieved it in the recording. It is as good as recorded music gets. Now, the B-side, Cowboy Song. So it wasn't for nothing that Lydon was impressed by America and was thinking about John Wayne movies and the vast expanse and all of that. Not for nothing. So he wrote the Cowboy Song. And according to Jim Walker, it was a very writerly, very highly skilled lyric, and it was sort of like a Western, or I guess no, as he put it, I think he said it was like a great old Irish poem. I think that was sort of how he phrased it, and he claimed, Walker, that it was his idea to match it to music that was similar to like the Bonanza theme. So you can hear that, and on the couple live performances of it, you can definitely hear that in Wobble's bass line. However, and this is where things diverge from Jim Walker. He did not like that the band did not attempt to get a good recording of the song or get a good take of the song. He felt that the B-side was just done on the quick. I am going to use Tim Riley from the book Tell Me Why. I'm going to use one of his terms. The song is as we hear it, is just turned into an underbellied spree. And, you know, it begins with some pretty impressively assaultive feedback. And a mass of voices, one of which is Lydon saying, you know, we can't hear the backing track. And the rhythm track kicks in, bass and drums, but the rest of it is just a mass of voices. In the interview that comes with the reissue, Lydon delineates a little bit what the different voices of the band are saying. I haven't listened to that interview in a long time, so I don't remember. So you're just going to have to listen to it on your own. But Lydon is clearly hurling abuse in the direction of Richard Branson in a kind of a, you know, not a mean-spirited way, kind of it's a send-up, right? I love the cowboy song. I love that it is so madcap. I love that, to me, one of the things that I love about post-punk, we'll call it, is the willingness to explore, the willingness to see what happens, and it contains a lot of the same elements that I love about psychedelia. That there's a sense of joy and a sense of exploration, a sense of being knocked out by all of the possibilities, but not overwhelmed by them, so that you can actually execute something and create something cool. And that comes through. I love the spirit of the cowboy song. So yes, it can be literally hard to listen to because of the feedback, but the mass of voices and the yelling and screaming and just absolute madness is super right up my alley. And maybe if they had gotten a full recording of the song, so to this day, I don't know what the lyrics should have been. It could have well have been an amazing set of lyrics. Who knows? Well, I don't think at this point we will ever know. But for what it is, I take it for what it is, and I love it for what it is. I think it's absolutely fucking incredible for what it is. So yeah, that was recorded in July of 1978. So the single comes out in October. A month before the single came out, they had filmed the video, which was a performance clip, and which they wound up kind of recreating for the rainbow shows, the lighting style. So the deep shadows, the stark lights, and it's dark and shadowy and intense for something that is just a performance clip with austere and very severe lighting. It does take on, it's a beautiful, beautiful piece of short film. Wobble is sitting on a folding chair off to the side because, you know, he hadn't really learned how to play standing up yet. But Lydon looks amazing. You know, like truly, like at this time, and like coming from the Sex Pistols into these early years of Pill, he is, I don't know, after Brian Jones, and maybe Bowie, but definitely after Brian Jones, he's the best dressed person in the history of rock and roll. Like, he just looks phenomenally spectacular every time. He has absolute style. But Keith Levine is right there behind it. Keith looks pretty goddamn cool too. And you know, that they just have style. They have style that matches the music. You know, to paraphrase David Lee Roth, it looks how it sounds. One, not to go on a downer, but one thing I will mention is, as the single's coming out, is right around the time, didn't look up the specific date, but it's right around the time that the Sid Nancy Spungen thing happened at the Chelsea Hotel in New York. So again, think about those two. Like, think about those like those are the parallel lines. Like, Jesus Christ. So like, one is emerging with the new, and one is utterly going to like the ultimate fucking level of degradation, right? So interesting to compare those two things. So we will now talk about finally this incredible masterpiece of an album. I have great respect for the fact that they basically abandoned imagery, iconography, etc., and oh, we're going over here now. I have huge respect for that. So that's something I feel like I should sort of say from the off. The other thing is, this album gets really diminished compared to Critical Favorite Metal Box. And I've always considered this of a piece with Metal Box, and I don't understand why this is not held in largely this at the same level of reverence. Jim Walker strangely seems to hate this album and consider it terrible. The press at the time, it's one of those things, like, I don't know that I'm listening to the same record. I don't understand what it is they're hearing or not hearing. The idea that everybody seemed to love the single but didn't like the album is absolutely baffling to me. I have never, ever understood that. So, and Walker, I'll be getting into some of his criticisms of the album later. But this to me is basically perfect. So first of all, we have, the artwork is phenomenal. The idea that it's a riff on fashion magazines. So we have the glorious, so this is Dennis Morris, so we have the glorious front cover, the glorious back cover of Wobble with that fake mustache. Fucking amazing. But then the inner sleeve of Keith Levine, and even like the font choices, like everything about this is just so spot on and so like perfect. And then the Life magazine, and look at that photo of Jim Walker, like, unbelievable. That's such a great photo, and almost kind of like a riff on like the Richard Avedon Beatles photos. I love it so much. So, tabloid fashion magazine, like what would be, like for like a furniture company or something, and then Life magazine, like just like a regular advert with that like very 70s font. Like, I love it. I love it. So amazing artwork. I will say this vinyl copy that I have, it largely sounds good. I have played it a lot over the years. I think the person who had it before me had played it a lot. I would have gotten this. Would I have gotten this in 96? I think I might have gotten it in 97. I don't actually remember. But I did get it pretty early on. But it does have, compared to this, I don't have the 2013 reissue on vinyl because it was very expensive. But this is the 2013 CD reissue. I bought this in Japan, though. So this is the Japanese issue of it. Now, this has a certain boxiness on some of the songs that this does not have. However, the drum sound on this, so overall, and in terms of just overall presence and filling the room, and the fact that the band sounds bigger than any band that ever fucking played, this is the digital version, the reissue from 2013 is gonna get you there. The only reason why I still primarily listen to this is the drum sound here is slightly kind of more processed. So you have the big overall presence. The only thing that kind of suffers is the drum sound a little bit. The drum sound here is like more naturalistic and more cavernous. So that's the difference there. Now, one of the reasons I consider this, and by the way, it is -10 today. So this is, when I talk about winter music, this is some winter music. The reason I consider this a winter album is because I think just my early associations with it. I bought the album, I loved it, I thought it was great, I really respected it, but I didn't play this album much for the first few years that I had it. Again, I thought it was really, really great, but it wasn't until a couple years after I bought it that I got the plastic box that this replicates. So this has the cowboy song on it, as I already mentioned, but it replicates the entire first album with the exception of the song "Fodder Stomp," and this was sort of my. I made a tape of it for the car, and that the apartment that I talked about in the last Pill video. That winter, we moved in towards the end of fall, and the landlord. So we were renting the top floor of a house, and the landlord, I think, was a drug addict. I'm pretty sure he was a drug addict. In July, he would be wrapped up with 2 sweaters and a jacket and a scarf, and his hands would be shaking, and he insisted on rent being paid in all cash. So you tell me. But he was pretty absentee. He didn't live there, and when we had gotten the apartment, he had promised that he would shovel and take care of stuff in the winter, because winter was fast approaching at that point, and he did fuck all. So and I didn't have a shovel. I didn't own a shovel, so I just would sort of make like tracks in the snow. Like the first snow sort of happened out of nowhere, and I just made tracks, and so like for like a week or something, like we like walked in the tracks. That was how we avoided getting snow on us. Like we would just walk in the same tracks. There was a lot of ice and sludge, and I feel like that ice and slush and sludge sort of got on everything, and it was a kind of a dingy apartment, and it was a icy, cold, sludgy time. Any of the photos that you ever see of John Lydon and early Pill, living in Gunter Grove, maybe now would be the time to throw some pictures up, Rich. Prompt. That was sort of how we were living. We weren't living too many steps above that, right? And then the second the spring came, all the insects fucking hatched, and oh my god. Good Lord. So I just have these very tight associations with that. So that's ultimately, I think, why I consider it a winter album. And that may not be the case for you. So at any rate, the first side of this album. Oh, and by the way, you'll notice that the tracks aren't the full tracks are not listed. That's because Lowlife and Fodder Stomp hadn't been completed yet. There also apparently was something called Cowboy Song 2. And in the two versions of it that they play, is that the Paris or the Brussels show? I think the Brussels show. It is slightly different. So I always wondered if, like, Cowboy Song 2 that John mentions in an interview, maybe that was going to be the version that they were going to do with the finished lyrics. Who knows? There's basically no credits, as you could see. There is recorded in England, September 78. Everything done by Pill. But my personal favorite part is Public Image Limited would like to thank absolutely nobody. Thank you. I think that puts across their vibe. One of the things I'm going to link to is I'm going to, again, thank you to Fodder Stomp. I am going to link to their interviews around this time because they are worth reading. John Lydon / Public Image Limited, like Frank Zappa, like John Lennon, like Iggy Pop. The interviews can be as good as the music. Viv Goldman wrote really, really, really amazing articles. Like kind of like early Bob Dylan, like with Robert Shelton and Al Aronowitz and Ralph Gleason, writing about him. Like Dylan was written about in a poetic, intelligent way early on, and as much as some people were idiots about Public Image Limited, the people who got it right and wrote about them really well. And the band just, they are so utterly iconoclastic in this period that I just think nearly every interview is worth reading. And in some cases, truly, the interviews, as this video is evidence of, I believe in squeezing every bit of pulp out of this, out of this group, because it is to me just that fucking endlessly fascinating. So, side one, recorded autumn of '78 at Townhouse Studios, a great studio, and the Manor. The engineer was Mick Glossop, because they weren't going to get Bill Price or John Leckie back. So the first three songs, or first four songs, I guess, make up side one. So it was, I guess, more or less recorded in sequence, and then mixed from there. So we will now get into that. So the album opens with Theme. Theme, I think, is, first of all, truly a statement of purpose, truly a break with the past. Theme it's how long is it? It's just a little over 9 minutes. And it is an absolutely perfect song. Wobble and the Public Image Limited aesthetic is established basically immediately. Wobble's bass line is a seesawing, back and forth, utterly repetitive, but perfect, because every single note of it is perfect. And but almost mimics what you would hear from church bells or something like that. And I don't know if I'm reading into that, but it really does seem as if it is mimicking a church bell pattern. And there is that sense of tolling and mourning, and the emotional intensity is palpable. Walker does a perfect job on the drums. Again, all snare all the time, beautifully. And then you have Keith Levine. I mean, just shooting fucking endless, melting or burning glass, fucking ice flames out of his guitar, strangulating notes. It is, and endless clusters of notes. The only thing I could sort of compare it to would be Why and Why Not on the first Yoko Ono Plastic Ono Band album. Maybe some stuff by Can. I mean, there's not really anything that I think really predates it. I think it takes the Plastic Ono Band guitar sound like to the next like level of development. All the people who ripped him off never would have had the fucking guts to go this far. And this is where, when Pill was constantly decrying the notion of rock and roll itself and that they were not a rock band, I think this is some sort of electric jazz music. Or it is genreless. People try to say dub reggae bass lines mixed with whatever. Like this is post-punk, because I don't know what the fuck else you could call it. And unlike what Magazine did, not to denigrate Magazine at all, but they were you could clearly parse what their influences were. This, I think, breaks the influences down into such component parts that it is more of their own language and is more of its own species or genre. And I guess we'll just call it post-punk. I don't know. This is where the limitations of a genre utterly fail. And then you have Leiden. Leiden is all the way over, depending on your configuration, opposite me, so that would be left, coming out of the left speaker. He's totally isolated, so it is the duel between Leiden and Levine. And Leiden, and we have kind of a new aspect of what Leiden does. So we have, the increasingly precise writerliness of what happens if you look at the Sex Pistols songs. In the Sex Pistols, John, there were the songs that there were the songs of increasing writerliness. There were the songs where he just flat out had something to say, like God Save the Queen or Anarchy in the UK, which read as just like a straight, like, linear idea top to bottom. And then there are the songs like 17 or Submission, which are more sort of what lyricists do, where it's not as linear and not to denigrate, but kind of filling. It's a little bit more about phonetic spaces, and this is another aspect. This is him. The words are almost incidental, because it is more vocalizing, and it is really using the voice as the instrument, and it is a whole new style of singing for him. I think that he had been developing it over the course of the Sex Pistols, and especially when you see like the last shows they did before they went to America, and then in parts of the American tour, you can kind of see the development of what he was doing. But here, in the same way Wobble drops out of the sky, this style drops out of the sky, and he is absolutely one of the great, truly possessed screamers in the history of rock and roll. Sorry, Public Image Ltd. Sorry, members, past and present and current. I love you all, but I say rock and roll. That's a term I like and a term I'm very comfortable with. Sorry. So it will just have to stand. God damn it. So, to me, John is right there with Little Richard and Iggy Pop and James Brown and John Lennon, like as one of the ultimate screamers of all time. And the contrast of I wish I could die, I will survive. It is the sentiments of Public Image, stripped of all of its multi-dimensionality and stripped of all of its writerliness and broken into component parts and as well, and stripped to its square root essence. And I wish I could die, I will survive, and everything else is almost incidental and purely more for the voice as the instrument. Incredible. And the thing that, and at the very end of it, as it sort of starts to trail off, the thing that Lydon talked about in The Filth and the Fury about humor, and he always said that the Sex Pistols were like mad, like not vaudeville, but music hall, demented music hall. And he talked about the Britishness of that. Even in your worst moment, even in most despair, you make a joke, and the importance of humor. And at the end of this excoriating, scalding, nearly 10-minute fucking throwing down the gauntlet, uncompromising opus, the first song on the first album to the most anticipated rock release of 1978, at least in England, at the very end of it, John just throws in "Terminal Bottom," like just as a non sequitur, a piss take, like I can't believe I just let it all hang out that much, and just throwing in this sort of humorous end, I think is an absolutely perfect touch. So then we get to Religion 1. Is it credited as such on here? I think it is. Oh wait, it's not credited at all. Jesus, what am I talking about? It is credited as Religion 1 on this. So this is a spoken word recitation of the lyrics. Keith Levine claims that it was his idea to do that. Why not? Sure, let's go with it. And then he was in the booth and told John, like, let's run that down. So sure, why not? Let's go with that. Absolutely love it. It's an amazing set of lyrics. It totally works as a standalone poem. Again, the writerliness is perfect. It's really, really, really sharp writing with really great internal rhymes and kind of a slightly shape-shifting structure, so you never fully know where the emphasis or where the rhyme or just the rhythmic emphasis is going to land. It shifts just enough. It zigzags just enough. John reads it in sort of a mock sermon, and the echo applied to it. I mean, he does sound like he is in an empty cathedral. He does sound like he is doing a lecture at a cathedral that has fallen into disrepair, at a midnight mass full. Where there's just some passed out drunks in the back row. It feels like a black and white movie. It is, but a stark black and white movie, with cutaways to his bright white face, as the street light comes through the stained glass onto his face. You can picture it. Stunning, beautiful performance, and then that goes into the song Religion, and I cannot fathom how the fuck, so in its original Sod in Heaven incarnation, I cannot fathom how the fuck this would have ever been a Sex Pistols song. It does not surprise me that they couldn't put music to this, because this is Public Image Ltd. So you had sort of the bass line of doom on theme, and now you have a creeping spy movie, film noir, lurching bass line, with Levine playing again an incredibly beautiful musical part but that's also, again, just it's more like jazz themes. It's somewhere between playing jazz themes and playing riffs, right? Some sort of new middle ground. and just these beautiful clusters of notes that are so tight and bunched up together. But then he does a little bit of like freer strumming to like release some of that tension. Absolutely like a fucking perfect musical bed. That Lydon does some singing, but more in tones, and it's not particularly melodic. So he screams and shrieks his way through theme, and he intones his way through this. He is now in the opposite speaker, so he would now be in the right speaker. He again is fully isolated, and I want to say I've never done the full like turn the speaker one way, turn the speaker the other way, but it's almost like a 60s stereo mix, a British Invasion stereo mix, or at least it mimics that. And it's so you have this sort of long, emotional, excoriating piece of music that is hard to listen to in its intensity. Then you have the sermon, then you have the musical presentation of the sermon, which, even though is very writerly and structurally a world away from the free improvisation of theme, is also hard to listen to in its intensity. And the lyrics are, again, absolutely fucking perfect. Like, I wasn't Catholic, I was raised Episcopalian, but we went to what was known as High Church. It was, for any Episcopalians out there, it was old school Rite One High Church, and I would get scolded by people during coffee hour if I loosened my tie during the sermon or something, or during the prayers of the people, that if I lowered my tie, I would get, or if I wasn't sitting properly, if I put my feet on the kneeler, so it was very, very, very rigid. And I feel like John captures that, because that is where the Catholic Church and Episcopal Church were very, very, very similar, right? And the Episcopal Church was sort of a not really Protestant, like it's technically Anglican Catholic. So he hits upon something that I instinctively completely understood. And also, as I've mentioned before, I went to a Catholic high school and was never Catholic, so I also saw it from that perspective as well. So so I completely get it. And, I went to we were the poorest family in an old money church. My grandfather had actually been the janitor at that church. So it was all these big money, old money, wealthy families. The women wore furs. They were all seemingly 120 years old. They all drove Cadillacs and Jaguars, and we had a Ford Fairmont, so that was rusted. So so I always felt the class difference. And so when I heard this song many years later, I already had stopped going to church long before that. But also, like Lydon, who was raised Catholic and went to mass and all of that. I was an altar boy when I was 8. I was one of the youngest altar boys that they had ever had, and I took to it. I was actually giving. I actually was showing 40-year-olds who were on the altar that they were doing things incorrectly. So there were people in the church who thought I was going to become a priest. So I never thought that, but that's so again, just that formality and the sort of the breaking away from that formality and kind of seeing that what are taken as these deeply ingrained traditions, a lot of it were actually just sort of arbitrary decisions made by the priest. It was kind of like their personal, like what they personally preferred, and that was like that was kind of like very scandalous for me to learn that. Like that was very weirdly like disillusioning that it wasn't some like thing that was handed down, like that you could trace everything back like 600 years, you know? So I completely get it. I completely understand it. So an amazing, amazing, amazing song. Excuse me. And so we've had Leiden isolated in one speaker, isolated in the center, and then isolated all the way over in the other speaker. So then side one ends with Annalisa. So we have had these formalist experiments so far on side one. And then Annalisa is sort of like, in a way, like the first real Public Image Limited song on the album, if that makes any sense. Where it is mixed as a full band playing all at once, and John is now finally merged with the band. John is not separated or isolated from the band. And what this ties together is the scalding emotional intensity of theme with the emotional intent of religion into the story of, and I want to get the name right, Annalise Michel. And Annalise was from Bavaria. She died January of 1976. She was epileptic. John Lydon is also epileptic and can't have like flashing strobes and stuff at his shows. Apparently he's epileptic to the level that driving past a forest and the sun like going through the trees, like that is enough to trigger a seizure. And so she was epileptic. They thought that she was possessed by the devil and brought in a Catholic priest to perform an exorcism, and she wound up dying. She wound up dying, I guess, of malnutrition. Her body just shut down. And so, you know, one of the things that I have talked about before, I talked about this in my last pill video, is the emotional intensity of for all of the people who to this day are still questioning John's intentions and, well, weren't the Sex Pistols like a punk rock monkeys? It's all fake. It's all bullshit. And people who then turn that with Public Image Limited to, oh, I see what he's doing here. It's meta pop statements. It's all like, all of that is, you know, as John said about Malcolm McLaren's situationism, mind games for the muddled classes, a great turn of phrase, right? And, you know, I think that, and I just think that people bring their own weird baggage and they get hung up on things. So, you know, the song Bodies, the masterpiece Bodies, you know, that's a real story about a real person, and people get all hung up on the abortion aspect of it, the pro-life or the pro-choice side, and they turn it into something that it is not. It is a human statement about what should not happen. It is looking at this and just seeing the depths to which human beings will sink, and saying quite simply, this is not right. And the idea of this mentally ill girl carrying around the aborted fetus in a bag to show people is that there's something fundamentally wrong about that. And in the same way that there's something fundamentally, what he's pointing out is fundamentally wrong in God Save the Queen. I quoted this passage from The Filth and the Fury before. I will quote it again. You don't write God Save the Queen because you hate the English people. You write it because you love them and you are sick of seeing them be treated terribly. And Annalisa is that. Like, it is, but it brings all of the personal, the more larger cultural statements, it brings all of that into stark relief, and all of these elements. So we have had the individual elements laid out, and now all of it comes together with John and the band together, combining all of the themes and all of the approaches. And the lyrics and the lyrical approach. This is the first melodic song on the record. It is an absolutely stunning, fucking, soaring, melodic, passage that John sings, contrasted against a scrankling series of sparks and bursts out of fucking Keith. Again, the bass line, like, this is kind of like the Public Image bass line. This is an all action fucking beautiful bass line from Wobble, that echoes or counterpoints the vocal melody like perfectly. And then you've got Walker, hyperactive, perfect tempo, and keeping the perfect tempo, because he doesn't race, but it's exactly the right tempo, and it exactly holds together Keith's scrankling and Wobble's emerging fluidity and ultimate presence. And by the way, really and truly, the band sounds fucking bigger than a house. They it sounds so much bigger than 4 people playing music. And this is a very, very live recording. It is the least produced sounding thing we've had up to this point. It is the most naturalistic and the most impressive. And John singing all the way up at the top of his range, really doing that kind of for the first time, full on, full-throated, and then contrasting that with the shrieks of the exorcism, the horror at what happened to this poor girl, like painting it in ultra vivid fucking emotional fucking honesty and reality. Absolute white knuckle intensity, masterpiece of a song, a masterpiece of sequencing, of tying the first side of this fucking masterful fucking album together. I have no idea how you could criticize this album. I have no idea how you could say, oh, the first album's like they're getting their act together, and then it's like, no. These guys knew what they were fucking doing from the start. And also just even the way that the group goes into like full chaos towards the end of the song, and yet they're not speeding up, they're not like, it just, they somehow, I don't go beyond themselves even, and that's how it ends. Like, one other thing I forgot to mention in terms of non-production, there is on John's speaker in Religion, there that might be him playing the piano, there is an absolutely mad piano part that kicks in, that is, again, great contrast to the separated formalism of and the writerliness of it, and it again has those aspects of what I love about late 60s stuff, the willingness to explore, the willingness to move things around in the stereo picture, the same sense of freedom that Jimi Hendrix or early Funkadelic had, where they were really gonna fuck around with the sound stage in really, really cool, interesting ways. I love all of that. So, but at any rate, but no, like, Annalisa is just absolute ultra vivid intensity, and Levine's variations on what he's doing, all of it is perfect, and it just, I would say, repeated themes and variations like a jazz player. This is some sort of weird genreless post-punk jazz music fucking from an alternate reality, except it is in this reality, and we can listen to it. Thank God Almighty for that, right? So then we flip the record over. Side 2 opens with simply the song Public Image. There is part of me that sort of wishes that they had just left it as a standalone single. According to Wikipedia, and I don't know that I've seen this anywhere else, they claim that there was supposedly a second version of the song that had a different set of lyrics. That was news to me when I looked at the Wikipedia entry. I do wish that they had left it as a standalone single. However, John, with the Sex Pistols and going forward with Pill, tended not to really do standalone singles very often, and I think that just wasn't sort of something that he was terribly interested in. So it's a phenomenal side 2 opener. I mean, you could make the argument that it should have opened the album, but then it would have wrecked sort of the kind of perfect sequencing of side 1. That being said, you could have made side 1, side 2, but then that wrecks the closer of the album. It's a mess. So anyway, Yeah, it's like I said. In a perfect world, there would have been like one more song, and that would have taken the place. Because, like I said, I think as a standalone single, that is a ridiculously powerful statement. Here, it's a great. I mean, it's great, and it's an amazing, indelible, perfect song. But that's just me. I'm a sucker for standalone singles, so I think that has been well established. So the final three songs were done at Gooseberry, and so one of the things is Pill, were a chaotic outfit. They were chaotic people, as Don Letts has talked about. Lots of people have talked about. They were often going in different directions at the same time. In other words, there would be, there would be people on alcohol, there would be people on speed, and then there would be people on heroin. So you had, and I don't know that Wobble and Levine ever really did get along personally. It doesn't really seem like they did. So there's also that dynamic. So one of the things that happened post the incident when recording the first single was they would go in if a band was recording in a studio and they had booked till like 1 a.m. or something, but they were done at 9. Pill would show up and just use that studio time for themselves. When they got into Metal Box, they started doing the phenomenon of just recording at night when nobody was in the studio. So these, they had to nip about to finish this album. Jim Walker, again, takes a very dim view of how all of that was done, and I don't agree with his view of it. But again, I think that if his idea was that they were going to work where the Pistols had recorded and work with Bill Price and John Leckie and have Peter Grant as a manager, if that's the direction that he wanted it to go, then I can completely understand that them nipping about, in sort of a random fashion would be infuriating and or disappointing to him. So we get the next song is Low Life. And Low Life musically is probably of a piece with Annalisa. It's another, to me, just another perfect early Public Image Limited song. And another amazing all-action bass line from Wobble, like indelible, really, really, really memorable. And again, there's there's the presence of the sound, but also just the fluidity. And that really combined, I swear to God, that with Walker's drums and Levine's guitar really does create, I mean, it really does, the mass, bigger than the sum of its parts, bigger than a house thing that is achieved on Phil Spector recordings, or even like that Lou Reed had with the Everyman Band, where it's just massive. This is just 3 people plus a vocalist. I struggle to think of other bands that function on that level. Certain Velvet Underground things, the Stooges, the Who in the late 60s, early 70s, but not much else. I mean, my goodness, it is a short list. So Low Life, there are theories as to who it is about, but I tend to think that I tend to believe that it is probably about McLaren. If it's about anything, it makes the most sense. And the idea of calling McLaren a bourgeoisie and anarchist, it like makes all the sense in the world. I think that lyrically, again, though not as formally written as something like Religion or even Public Image, there is a writerliness, and the precision of the words is, even though it's not as verbose, is like, I feel like every word is just like perfectly chosen. And again, another absolutely soaring melody, and John hits those notes like he hits those notes really like his life depends on it. I mean, just sings the absolute hell out of it. Just beautiful, beautiful, incredible vocal performance. And over what the rhythm section is doing, again, Levine just churning out these amazing, again, themes, somewhere between a theme and a riff, and then the variations on that, and just you know, he gets more out of hitting one chord at a slightly different interval than people get out of like shredding all over the goddamn neck. You know what I mean? Like he communicates more and creates more excitement with incredibly simple motions. And it almost in some ways sounds like the stuff that like Bob Dylan talked about in the Oh Mercy chapter of his autobiography, where he talks about like the triplet theory stuff, and like that you get the most out of the least, and that you are just setting up these stratagems, and all you have to do is hit things at intervals, and it creates all of this other stuff that fills in for the audience. Levine, like, that's what Levine's doing here. I mean, this is it again, the elements of it are so simple, and it seems like anybody could do it, but nobody fucking can, you know, and nobody would think to do it that way. And just as a tone, as a sound, as an addition to the presence, as a further contrast with John as the middle ground. You know, if Wobble's already a counterpoint to Lydon, then you have all of this space in the middle that's being filled by what Levine is doing. I mean, this is phenomenal music, and again, amazing lyrics, and it is melodic. I think it is a beautiful soaring melody. So, you know, there are now 2 on this album. Well, I guess Public Image, yeah, so yeah, exclusive to this album. So then the next song is Attack, one of my personal favorites. Now, it's interesting, years later, John Lydon said that his sort of conception of this album was that it was sort of to be similar to the Stooges' Funhouse, that in other words, that it was this band kind of let loose in the studio, roaring and live. I don't know that I fully see that, simply because the slope of this album, the shape of this album is so dramatically different than Funhouse. I sort of don't fully get that, but I feel like Low Life and Attack, I could kind of see where he's coming from. It's just that this is much more conceptual and not as visceral and physical as Funhouse. And Funhouse goes in like one direction the entire, from second one until it fucking self-immolates with LA Blues. There's a lot of feints and setups, and so I don't know that I fully get that, but Attack is an absolutely, it's how long of a song is it? I feel like it's really short, so it's 2 minutes 55, because that's the other thing is Low Life. Well, Annalisa is 6 minutes. Low Life might as well be. Low Life is 3.5, but it operates in that same vast space that Annalisa does. Now, on the Japanese version of the CD, okay, so the Japanese, you know, famously do album recreations very well. They take it very seriously, so we get, you know, right. But famously, Japanese lyric transcriptions. Now, I don't know if it's like a law there, but the Japanese are very take their lyric translations. They're in, I want to say, nearly every album I've ever bought. English album that is a Japanese import in the years before I ever made it to Japan, but buying albums there as well. So Japanese lyric translations are notoriously incorrect and can make for some hilarious reading. Their interpretation of Low Life is particularly novel. What is instead of bourgeoisie anarchist, it is bourgeoisie in your cares, for instance, which Like there's a lot of that. Like not even like there are just moments that are truly not close. But there is but Attack, and I feel like this is indicative of what Attack is like to listen to just as a song. It simply reads, "Impossible to transcribe the lyrics to this song." I will try to hold that steady so you can see that. I think that is absolutely hysterical. Like there is nothing that we can do about this for you. And I just picture some poor put upon translator sitting in an office somewhere, like a translator salary man, just simply saying, no, there's nothing I can do about this. So there is this is probably the most, I guess, dub mixing, and the ultra liveness of Lowlife and Annalisa. They're now studioifying the liveness with the mixing and getting more abstract. So there is like a repeating echo effect. So it is a phalanx of overdubbed, or not even overdubbed, just repeated Leidens echoing into the cavern. An amazing kind of V-shaped descending and ascending wobble bass line, and then Levine isn't even really playing guitar parts. I mean, it's almost just like there's nominally a riff, but it's all sort of weird and detuned, and is just sort of lava over this descending and ascending landscape, and then you just have the mass of spiraling Leidens over the top. There are certain lines that pop out, like "You made me insecure." I would have to imagine that this is maybe another broadside against McLaren. Would certainly make sense, given that the state of the court case, the Sex Pistols court case, and all of that. It could be about anything. But I absolutely love the song. It's another distillation of what I love about Public Image Ltd. And it's just so creative, and it is unlike music that you are going to hear anyplace else. And it's not punk. It's not like you don't know what it is, and yet you are utterly captivated and moved by it tremendously. And it is the force of articulation, the force of their presence, that is utterly compelling. And you hear it in Lowlife, you hear it in Annalisa, and you hear it here. And that, in some ways, is sort of the end of the album, because then we get into the final underbellied spree. So we have had the formalist things on the first side. We get into sheer liveness, and then we go into like the cowboy song. So this album is sort of an expanded version of the single. It ends with another underbellied spree, the nearly 8-minute Fodder Stomp. This is the song that broke Jim Walker's belief in the band. This is the one. This is the one that did it. Fodder Stomp is basically, so first of all, it's the most produced. It is the least naturalistic drum sound, and I guess kind of like a weird, I don't even know, deconstructed dub reggae sort of drum sound with like, I don't know the terminology, a delay effect, I don't know, and then kind of a pure funk, pure disco bass line, and then over the top of that we like Religion, we have the return of some madcap piano, random piano. So if you've ever seen that photo of John Lydon playing the piano during the Nevermind the Bollocks sessions, where he looks deranged, this is the sound of that, I guess. And then we have the first of Keith Levine's synthesizer experiments. So, but they're really, really cool and really like futuristic and awesome and almost Giorgio Moroder-esque synth lines that are clean, gleaming chrome synth lines that are fucking cool, and I kind of wish that there were more of those because they just sound fantastic. But then let's face it, what most of the song is sped up voices, very speeded voices of Wobble, Levine, and Lydon at various pitches and speeds, sometimes harmonized with themselves, of them mostly shrieking, "We only wanted to be loved," and then sort of fucking about from there. Wobble, of course, is kind of threatening the engineer. Wobble also is going to let off a fire extinguisher. The fire extinguisher will surface when we talk about Public Image Limited next time. So, interestingly enough. So yeah, some people hate this. Some people really, really don't like it. And, we only wanted to be loved. We only wanted to be loved. And some people really, really hate that. From what I understand, I don't know if this is an urban myth or not, but apparently they used to play this song late at night at Studio 54, and apparently it was a big hit. People loved the snottiness and obnoxiousness and brattiness of the "We only wanted to be loved" refrain. And the one story that I read is like a big circle, like an arm-in-arm circle of people jumping around, belting out "We only wanted to be loved," which I think is absolutely hysterical. And and Wobble gets out off a few good ones, like "We only wanted to finish the album with a minimum amount of effort," which we are now doing very successfully. and I love it. I love, because this is a very serious album and a very intense album, and the idea of ending it on a nearly 8-minute, underbellied spree. The idea that it ends with their very own bratty, version of my name, look up the number, which I adore. And I love that side of the Beatles. I love that side of British sensibility. I love all of that, and the sort of the Python-esque stuff. I love all of that. And I love it here. And I've always thought, like I said, it's a very, very, very serious album, a very intense album, an album that at times is truly hard to take. And the idea that, kind of like ending theme with "Terminal Bottom," the idea that you would just have this ridiculous, absurd, song that they're elbowing you and going, see what we're does that bug you? Just the idea of that, you either get on the wavelength of that and enjoy it and have a laugh, or you don't. And I'll tell you what, this song fills up the car fucking beautifully. For all the times I've played this music driving around, it is absolutely perfect when you are sailing down the highway or whatever. It is glorious. And in the early days of social media, where it would be you're rich, and I just would put up these posts of "only wanted to be loved." I only wanted to be loved. And I just would have do block posts of "I only wanted to be loved," and then nobody would and I would get unfriended and unfollowed. So yeah, I love it, and I think it's a cool, wonderful, weird, madcap, way of ending the album. And I'm sorry, but it needs a joke. It needs a laugh. It needs a kind of a and that's not for nothing. That's how the song "Public Image" ends. You are getting this out of your system, and I think that's a perfect way to do it. This comes with a second disc, as you would have seen. The second disc, and this is what's on the reissue, and this is what's on the version on YouTube now as well, there is an interview recorded in October with Viv Goldman for Radio 1, and Lydon takes some swipes at then British Broadcasting Institution Jimmy Savile, and and thus had problems with the BBC for many years afterwards. So it's a really fascinating interview, certainly well worth hearing. Like I said, I am going to be putting links to all of the other interviews, in the box below. So you should totally check those out. And now I think we're going to go over to yesterday's Rich. And yesterday's Rich will then kick it. I shall reappear. A release called The Steel Leg versus the Electric Dread, which is it's an EP, so it's jaw wobble, but Keith Levine plays guitar on it, and he is credited as Straight Time Keith, and Don Letts is on it, and that is actually that's actually pretty cool. That's actually a pretty interesting release. The first track is amazing and is basically like, you could kind of argue is almost like a great lost Public Image Limited song, except for the fact that John Lydon's not on it. But it's like got like great Keith Levine guitar work. A lot of the rest of it, there's Don Letts toasting, which is, more, I don't know, feels a little more naturalistic than Jaw Wobble doing a phony baloney Jamaican patois. That I will actually link below. If you want to hear Dreadlock Don't Deal in Wedlock, you're on your own. But I'll link to I will put a link to the EP as well, because while I wouldn't say it is essential, and I'll be honest, my tolerance for dub reggae instrumentals is not great. I mean, there's some like interesting sonic things that happen. There is the sort of eccentricity that you would expect from Pill, and the sort of post-punk, post-psychedelic, if you want to call it that, eccentricities and oddness that are interesting. So like some of that's cool, but yeah, I don't know that I don't know that it's essential, but if you like these players, that is at least worth listening to. Early December, Public Image Ltd started rehearsing for their live coming out. Now, the business of Public Image Ltd playing shows was, of course, that they were not going to tour, and Lydon made that very, very clear. And I think Keith Levine wasn't particularly into touring. I think Jim Walker and Wobble probably would have wanted that, and Walker in particular seemed to really not like the fact that they weren't out there gigging. But Keith Levine, I think, found touring just sort of a redundant idea for a band, and Lydon, the Tour of America had obliterated the Sex Pistols, so I get why Lydon would be too into touring. What's interesting, though, and where we get into sort of Keith Levine's, concept of positive negativism, that way of thinking is something that I am totally fascinated by, and has informed a lot of my thinking at various times over the past 25 years. I think the idea, though, that they weren't going to tour, what that meant, though, was when they would do a show, that show would take on extra significance and added importance. And really, it fit the aesthetic of Public Image Ltd at the time. It made, given the music that they were making and the way that they made their music, it makes all the sense in the world that you wouldn't try and be replicating that night after night. I get that. So anyway, so they started doing rehearsals, and in that, John Lydon's mother not doing well, John had already worked out parts of Death Disco and actually sang it to her in the hospital. She loved it. She loved the song. She loved the idea. She loved the idea of the elegy being a disco song. She got the humor of it. John's dad apparently was appalled at the idea. But, as John put it, delivering honesty to your parent on their deathbed is one of the greatest things that you can do. He's right. I speak from personal experience. So there's that. But there is also, apparently, in and among the new material, is... So supposedly there's an instrumental that they worked on as a band, but then there is the oft fabled, still unheard song "You Stupid Person," which Jim Walker raved about in his interview with Fodderstomp, and the song has gone on to be talked about. Apparently Wobble confirmed its existence. I don't know if Levine ever did. John Lydon said that he had no idea what Jim Walker was talking about. In this period of time, so as far as I know, it's never been bootlegged. Walker claims to have a recording of it somewhere, so who knows, but it doesn't have a vocal or a melody line or anything like that, so who knows? Who knows? But Jim Walker was, post the recording of the album and post turning down Peter Grant, Jim Walker, and post signing of the contracts with Virgin, Walker was soured on the entire idea of Pill. So just as they were starting to become a band that performed, he already had one foot out the door. And really was looking to get out. It's one of the sad things about Public Image Ltd. Was and this played out unfortunately for years and years until we get to the tour for album, really, were people trying to use Public Image Ltd. As a means to an end, and Walker has said, I don't think it's nefarious or anything like that, but that it wasn't like gonna get him anywhere. It wasn't doing anything for him. So, make out of that what you will. But anyway, December 20th, 1978, in Brussels, Belgium, Brussels Theatre, Public Image Ltd. Made their live debut. And, apparently, during the sound check for the show, the band was, I guess, experimenting with the sound system, and apparently led by Keith Levine, who on the boards, and they blew out part of the PA system, so that pushed the gig back. The first set, as far as I know, is unrecorded. The second set, however, is recorded. It was an extremely hostile audience, and nobody sort of really knew what they were. The crowd didn't really have a realistic sense of what they were dealing with. The set list is really, really, really interesting, though. So the set list, they don't play a very long set because, we'll get to that. What I will say is there is, on the existing recording, the second set, there is an interminable sound check. It's like 10 and a half minutes. But then they finally play Theme. So the first song they ever played on stage as a band is Theme. It is absolutely fucking incredible. It is excoriating. Keith Levine plays some of the guitar of his lifetime. Some of the freest, most impressive strangulated guitar ever. Like, unbelievable. It's the best thing they did that night. And a hell of an opening to them as a band on stage. Then they do Belson as a Gas, Lowlife, Religion, Attack. They played and apparently somebody threw a glass. John Lydon left the stage. Apparently Lydon sang some of the songs, so maybe like Low Life and Religion, I don't know, sang from backstage. That became something, so he was not on stage while singing. That became something that they got really into doing. Apparently during the first set, Lydon handed the mic off to people in the crowd who just sang, but again, that's unrecorded, so, and the album would have just only been out for a very short amount of time, so who knows if people actually even knew the lyrics. But they do two versions of the cowboy song, instrumental, so back to back too, like slightly different. And then they just do an instrumental version of Public Image, and that's the end of the show. Apparently, there was somebody acting up in the crowd. Wobble, as is becoming a pattern, did not like what he was seeing and went over and kicked the guy in the head. And the person that he kicked in the head, who was acting up, I guess, was the head of security at the venue. So I think that the band was barricaded in their dressing room for like 3 hours after that. It was kind of a debacle. But again, the audience is pretty amped up. I don't hear it on the recording, but apparently people were yelling for Sid Vicious. So yeah, that was the beginning of the band on stage. So yeah, and truly volatile. 2 days later, they are in Paris at Le Stadium. Apparently Le Stadium, though, from again, all of this is fodder stomp, all right? I'm being honest about this. But they did obsessive, perfect, amazing work. So, again, salute to fodder stomp. But apparently Le Stadium was actually an ice rink. So not really a venue. The underappreciated, I believe all-female punk band The Loos opened, L-O-U-S. The Loos were talked about in Lester Bangs' epic Clash article, multi-part Clash article, that's in the Carburetor Dung, Psychotic Reactions and Carburetor Dung book. So, Lester was a fan of The Loos, cool band. It's kind of like Sex Sick. Like, you wish that it had gone somewhere and been held up as something really, really cool. And unfortunately, they are sort of something of a punk rock obscurity. I have read some fan reviews of the Paris show. Also, I just want to point out, isn't it interesting that just a few months before in Paris, Sid filmed the My Way sequence. And a couple months later, which features the famous dig at Johnny Rotten, right? And some months later, and when asked about it, Lydon said, when asked what he thought of Sid's version of My Way, Lydon said that he thought it was really, really funny, and he really enjoyed it until about the middle, where Sid was taking it too seriously. And there's something to that. Someday I'll discuss that again. That's a different video, but I get his point. But I have read a couple reviews saying that they really love the Paris, the December 22nd show in Paris. I will be honest, there are two versions of it that I've heard. I don't think that either. Both are pretty bad sounding. Both are, in fact, actually really bad sounding. One is worse sounding than the other. They're both up on YouTube. I'm not going to link them because I'm trying to link the great stuff, the cool, interesting stuff, right? So, what is interesting about... According to a couple of people who were there, it was an absolutely phenomenal, scintillating show. From the audience evidence, or from the recorded evidence, I would say that this was not as amazing as the best parts of the Belgium show. And I know that I didn't really talk about the Belgium show. It's because I want to get into it a little bit more with the show that comes after this one. So I'm sort of saving what I have to say. I will link to the Belgium show. Just know that the first 10 and a half minutes are a literal sound check. So it's a little rough going. Anyway, Paris. The one interesting thing about the Paris show is, so they were doing Belson Was a Gas at all of these, but they actually do another Sex Pistols song. They perform Problems, one of my favorite Sex Pistols songs ever. And kind of musically, I think one of the most perfect realizations of what the Sex Pistols were as a band. And some of Steve's best stuff, some of Paul's best stuff. And you really like the real firepower and blood and guts and honesty and fury of that band is in that song. Pill plays it. It's a weird arrangement. Keith doesn't do power chords. He doesn't in any way do what Steve Jones did, and it almost sounds like a weird angular. It's two things. It's weird and angular, but also it almost sounds like a mid-60s. They almost sound like a mid-60s mod band. They sound like almost like High Numbers era Who combined with being an angular post-punk band. It's an odd arrangement, and Lydon is somewhere between his Public Image singing style and still doing Sex Pistols phrasing, because he's not that far out from having just been in that band. So that's a fascinating thing to seek out if you want to seek that show out. But I consider that something of a lesser gig, I will be honest. And apparently the show ended because Wobble was hit in the head by a pig's head that had been launched from the audience. So I don't know at what point that happened, though, because they did do encores. So your guess is as good as mine. If anybody wants to clarify, the comment section, jump in it. So anyway, all of this is leading up to their big London debut. So those were sort of warm-up shows to get the band on stage, figure things out. And then they performed at the Rainbow Theatre. Now, unless I'm wrong, I want to say, actually, no, I'm not going to go down that road. Never mind. I'm not going to go down that road. At any rate, so the Rainbow Theatre, famous venue. John talks about having the seats removed so that the audience could not just be a passive audience, okay? I have read over the years that the seats would have been removed anyway because there had been a Clash show that was particularly violent. The thing is, though, John mentions having the seats taken out in a number of places. So I sort of get the feeling that that really was at his insistence. I just don't think he would make such a point of mentioning that. So anyway, so they did two shows. They played on Christmas Day and on Boxing Day. And what's interesting about that is this is now really like the Public Image Ltd. Aesthetic of fitting somewhere in the cracks, finding the unwritten rules, and then going into those places where nobody else is thinking to go, and creating spaces out of what had just been cracks, prying all of those things open, finding possibilities, positive negativism, if you will, right? So, in England, nobody would ever do anything on Christmas Day. And most people just assumed that it was against the law to do anything on Christmas Day or Boxing Day. However, It wasn't. It was just this sort of unspoken accepted thing. So Pill doing these two shows caused a furor. Which is fascinating because they weren't actually doing anything wrong or illegal or so at any rate the opening acts, because this was, like I said, this was their big homecoming gig, and the album had been out, the single had been out, the single had done really, really well, so they wanted to put together an interesting, so kind of like in the same way that they that everything with Pill was sort of an event, so that the artwork was special, that everything was that the clothes were special, that the iconography, that the advertisements were special. They wanted to put together a cool, interesting bill and not just do a bunch of punk rock bands. So they had the Basement Five. The Loos again opened for them. Don Letts DJ'd. But also dub reggae artist or spoken word artist, but he also made dub reggae records, or spoken word with dub reggae backings. Linton Kwesi Johnson, who, again, I'm not really Joe Reggae, but I do have I have some Linton Kwesi Johnson stuff, and I really, really respect his work. Again, I wouldn't go so far as to say like, oh, I'm a big fan, but he's I think he's really fucking cool. And so he was an opening act. I think that's pretty awesome. Now, there are scattered recordings of these two shows. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know the difference between which is the 25th and which is the 26th. The show that I'm going to link to, which is excellent sound quality, and I'm going to talk about in a second, that is definitely the show from the 26th. And that is absolutely phenomenal. There is a bootleg of it that is called Extra Issue, so if you ever come across Extra Issue, snap that up. But again, can just use YouTube. Now, if you are a fan of the band, if you are a fan of this album, if you're a fan of this era, this is a show to check out. This is gold. I'm going to make a bold and sweeping claim. It's as good as the album. It's like an alternate version of the album. So if you want an alternate live version of the album with some different songs, here you go. Here's your shot. Also, it's basically the last thing that they're going to do with Jim Walker. So enjoy that, because Jim's got one foot out the door. So yeah. The set, so I'm just going to talk about the second show. So first of all, they do Theme. Theme is absolutely fucking incredible. Keith even, I'll say, tops the heights of what he did in Brussels. John's voice is like a saxophone. It is an instrument, and it is in some ways a duel between him and Keith. Wobble's bass is amazing, and then you have the almighty snare virtuosity of Jim Walker. Fucking incredible, like unbelievable opening. And then they do Low Life. Low Life is amazing. I love that song. But again, just to hear it just purely in a live setting, amazing. And then we get to their version of Belson Was a Gas. This is, of the three that are out there, this is the best one. This is, so someday I will talk about the Sex Pistols version of it. There are a few versions. Someday I will discuss that. Other than to say, it's, especially the version at the Longhorn Ballroom in Texas, is one of the most terrifying things I think you're ever going to hear. It is a dark song. It's an evil sounding song about like one of the most evil things in all of human history, right? And it's ultimately the ultimate place where the clashing sensibilities of McLaren and Lydon you know, I always read a lot into it that that of course that's where the band broke up. Of course that's the last song they completed. Of course that was McLaren wanted to do this and Lydon wanted to do this, and it's you know, and then you get like the weird McLaren led versions on the Great Rock and Roll Swindle. So interestingly, it is introduced by John here as quote unquote a song that Keith and I wrote. Make what you will of that, because at this point, Sid was claiming that Belson was his. And when Nancy Spungen would talk about how Sid should have become the frontman of the Pistols and had transcended John and had usurped his role and was a better and could have been a better John than John, his supposed writing of Belson was held up as the example of what Sid could really have done if the band had continued and just simply made him the front man. So who knows what, you know, there are two songs in this world, in punk rock world, that have weird authorship histories. This and of course Chinese Rocks, right? But Chinese Rocks, I think, is pretty well documented. This Belson was a gas at this point. Like, who knows what the story is? They probably are Lydon's lyrics. Certainly parts of it are absolutely his. I feel like years ago, and I've never been able to find it again. I swear to God, unless I like fucking fever dreamed it, that I saw a piece of paper with Sid's handwritten lyric of it. I swear to God I saw that at some point somewhere. But who knows? That might have just been a thing that came out of my subconscious. Who knows? But what Pill does with this is, first of all, again, Keith Levene doesn't do power chords and he doesn't play rock and roll guitar, right? So what he's doing are strange, repetitive shards, clusters of notes, and then you have Walker doing all of this really like jarring stop-start stuff, and it's an entirely different type of tension than what the Sex Pistols achieved. And the Sex Pistols, there was still that sense of the bad taste on purpose. Are they playing it for laughs? The thing about the Sex Pistols version is I always felt that there's a shift that happens in the song. So there's like the like extreme bad taste or extreme provocation, and then it gets like weirdly real. It gets into the be a man, a big tough man, join our army, kill yourself, kill someone, be a hero. It gets fucking like darker and creepier, but more real, and it really gets into the evil, and it uses that. And I always thought that was part of the genius of the song, is it uses sort of the shock of the verses, but when Lydon gets into the declarative stuff, that's where it takes on. That's where you know that it's not playing for laughs, and that it's a serious song about, well, like, as a topic as serious as it gets, but it's dealing with it in a weird way. It's dealing with evil on evil terms, and it's dark, fucked up stuff that they're plowing into, right? And this is like, this song is like the ultimate, the way Pill plays it is like the ultimate contrast off of something like Religion or Annalisa. It's the underside of all of that. It would have been interesting if they had recorded a version of it at some point, if it had been a B-side. I think that if they just hadn't gotten into the metal box thing, they might have. Who knows? Maybe it coming out on the Great Rock and Roll Swindle in 2 versions. Maybe that was enough to get them to back off the song. I don't know. I really, really don't know. But it is absolutely fascinating. Then they tear through fucking Annalisa. It's fucking amazing. Great version of Public Image. Then a terrifying version of Religion. and then Attack. Like, Attack is another, like, absolute motherfucker. And then they do Public Image again, and that's the end of the show. Absolutely phenomenal. Like, white hot. One of, like, the best, like, live recordings. Super weird, super idiosyncratic. And they are like a jazz band, because there is that loose casualness, and there is that sense that they're not so much playing songs or trying to replicate a record, but as they really are just these musicians, like, that what is compelling them together is the force of the music, and it is these elements conjoining in ways that are surprising to even them, because they just keep coming at it from different angles and keep exploring and finding new spaces within the music. Absolutely fucking amazing. So I'm going to link to that show. Check that one out. Like, I cannot recommend that one highly enough. They were already, in the space of a 6-day span, a formidable live act. They were already absolutely incredible. And they had a live analog that was as powerful as what they were on record. The other thing about the London show, there was apparently no lights for Brussels or Paris. I mean, there was just the standard venue lights. There is some footage. I will also link that, because the London show that I'm going to link to just has decontextualized footage of the band and some still photographs. It's more of just for the listening experience, but there is footage of the first show. It is stark. It's the musical. It's the visual analog to the music. Stark spotlights, and then everything else is like all the rest of the lights are green. The band looks fucking phenomenal. Lydon looks phenomenal. Like, they are one of the best dressed bands on the planet. Levine looks amazing. Like, it is like Wobble, like, is sitting on a fucking folding chair and looks incredible. Like, it is just, like, the footage. I wish that would come out as a concert film. I don't know why it hasn't. It is absolutely, or why not on an expanded reissue? I have no idea. But I will link to that just so you get a sense of what they looked like on stage, because it's so stark. It really does look like some sort of avant-garde theater performance, and just super, super imaginative. And I feel like a lot of people in the 80s and 90s stole from that style, and I know that Iggy Pop and David Bowie had done it. Like, it's not wholly their invention. However, they really perfected it, and the sort of the fact that the contrast of the stark white light with the green, amazing. So they look as amazing as they sound. So yeah, and following that, the year wraps up, or on the day, on Boxing Day, the band officially changed the name of the company from Tinkiskis to Public Image Ltd. So that is how the year ends, with them formally being Public Image Ltd. Thanks, the rich of yesterday, but now that we are, fortunately enough, right, we are back now to the rich of today, and the rich of today just wants to say to all of you that I think we're going to wrap things up here. This is going to be a fucking, to quote Joe Strummer of all people, fucking long one, isn't it? And it's only going to get longer from here. It's only getting worse. So remember a few months ago when I said that December, January, February was gonna, if you like the long form content, ta-da! Well, it has come to be. So anyway, thank you for watching. If you have watched all of this, God bless you. And we are marching ever closer to the 100 subscriber special. So we keep picking them up as we have now for the past year. We just keep getting them one by one, you know, and I like that because it feels very, very organic and feels very, very natural. So each and every person, thank you very much. And the 100 subscriber special, I've got a fun thing planned for that. So so you know, as I've been saying, tell your friends. But for now, that wraps things up here. I hope that you've enjoyed this. I will be back. I don't know if I'm going to let this one stand for 2 weeks or for one. I'm not really sure. The 79 Public Image Limited, Jesus Christ, that's gonna really be another mountain, even bigger mountain than this one. So so we shall see if I give myself 1 or 2 weeks, but either way, I will be back soon enough. And we're in the grips of pill now for at least a little while. We're going to at least go up to the end of the 70s and maybe pick up 1980 later. I haven't decided yet because these are long enough. So at any rate, everyone, again, thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Please comment and like and all of the various YouTube things. And I will see you again very soon. And yeah, thanks again. All right. Bye.